The spring rain had been falling for 3 days straight when Naomi Abbott's horse stumbled on the muddy trail, throwing her hard into the rushing waters of what had been a peaceful creek just that morning. She clawed at the slick rocks, her fingers scraping uselessly against moss-covered stone as the current pulled at her heavy skirts. The water rose impossibly fast, swallowing her waist, then her chest, the cold stealing her breath. Her boot caught between two rocks, trapping her as surely as iron shackles. She yanked desperately, but the leather held firm, and the water kept climbing inch by terrifying inch. Terror seized her throat. She was going to drown here, alone in the Wyoming wilderness, miles from Evanston where she had been headed to meet her brother. The spring of 1876 had brought unprecedented rainfall to the mountains, and she had been foolish enough to think she could make the journey alone. Now she would pay for that arrogance with her life. Then she saw him. He emerged from the tree line like something from a dream or perhaps a hallucination born of panic. A massive man, broad-shouldered and tall, with dark hair falling past his shoulders and a thick beard covering a strong jaw. His buckskin shirt stretched tight across a chest that looked carved from the very mountains he called home. He moved with startling speed for someone so large, his boots finding purchase on rocks that had betrayed her moments before. "Hold on." His voice cut through the roar of the water, deep and commanding. Naomi tried to answer, but another surge of current slammed into her, and water filled her mouth. She coughed, choking, her vision blurring. The world tilted dangerously. The mountain man reached her in seconds. He did not hesitate, plunging into the rushing water up to his thighs, then his waist. His hands, calloused and strong, gripped her arms. "My boot," she gasped, "caught between the rocks." He nodded once, his eyes the color of a storm-darkened sky meeting hers with an intensity that somehow steadied her racing heart. Then he ducked beneath the water's surface. She felt his hands working at her boot, felt the strength in his fingers as he pried at the rocks. The current battered them both, but he remained solid as an oak, unmovable. Her boot came free with a sudden jerk. Before she could even process what was happening, the mountain man's arm wrapped around her waist, and he lifted her against his chest as though she weighed nothing at all. The muscles in his arms bunched and flexed as he turned against the current, carrying her toward the bank. Without thinking, driven by pure instinct and fear, Naomi wrapped her arms around his neck and held on with everything she had. Her fingers locked together behind his head, her face pressed against the warm skin of his throat. She could feel his pulse there, strong and steady, a counterpoint to her own frantic heartbeat. "I have got you," he said, his voice rumbling through his chest into hers. "You are safe now." She did not let go, even when his boots found solid ground, even when he climbed the muddy bank with her still clutched against him, even when they reached the shelter of the pine trees where the rain fell less heavily. She could not make her arms release him. "Miss." His voice gentled, one large hand coming up to rest on her back. "You are safe now. The water cannot reach you here." Naomi knew she should let go, knew that clinging to a strange man like this was improper, even dangerous, but her body would not obey her mind. She trembled violently, shock setting in, and her arms only tightened around his neck. The mountain man stood there for a long moment, holding her weight as easily as if she were a child. Then, seeming to reach some decision, he shifted his grip and began walking. She felt him moving through the forest, his gait steady and sure despite the burden he carried. "Where are you taking me?" she managed to whisper against his neck. "My cabin. It is not far. You need warmth and dry clothes, or the cold will kill you as surely as the water would have." She should protest, should demand he put her down, but the trembling had become violent shaking now, her teeth chattering so hard she could not form words. And still, she could not make herself let go of him. The cabin appeared through the rain like a refuge from a storm. It was larger than she expected, solidly built from hewn logs with a stone chimney from which no smoke currently rose. The mountain man mounted the 3 steps to the covered porch and shouldered open the heavy wooden door. The interior was dim and cool, but blessedly dry. She registered details in fragments. A large stone fireplace, a table and chairs crafted from rough wood, furs covering a bed in the corner, shelves lined with supplies and tools. It was sparse but clean, the home of a man who lived alone but took pride in his space. He carried her to a chair near the fireplace and finally, gently, began to pry her arms from around his neck. "I need to build a fire," he said softly. "You need to get warm, but I cannot do that while you are holding on to me." The logic of his words penetrated the fog of shock. Naomi forced her frozen fingers to unlock, to release him. The moment she did, she felt bereft, as though she had let go of the only solid thing in a tilting world. He knelt before the fireplace immediately, and within moments had coaxed flames to life with an efficiency that spoke of years of practice. The fire caught and spread, orange light filling the cabin with warmth and dancing shadows. Only then did he turn back to her. Up close, with the firelight illuminating his features, she could see he was younger than his size and bearing suggested. Perhaps 30, perhaps a bit less. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but handsome in a rugged, unrefined way. Those storm-gray eyes studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You are shaking," he observed. "Your clothes are soaked through. You will catch your death if you do not get out of them." Heat flooded her cheeks despite the cold. "I cannot simply undress in front of you." "I will turn my back," he said simply, "but those wet things must come off." He moved to a chest in the corner and pulled out clothing, rough spun but clean. "These will be too large, but they are dry. There is a blanket here as well. Call out when you are decent, and I will help you get closer to the fire." He set the clothes on the chair beside her, then turned to face the far wall, his broad back to her. True to his word, he did not look. Naomi's fingers fumbled with the buttons of her dress, clumsy from cold and shock. The heavy fabric clung to her skin, sodden and uncooperative. She managed to work the dress down her shoulders, but her corset laces had swollen with water and would not budge. "I cannot," she said, frustration and embarrassment warring in her voice. "The laces are stuck." A pause. Then, "Do you give me permission to help?" She should say no, should maintain some semblance of propriety. But the cold was seeping into her bones and she could not stop shaking. "Yes," she whispered. He turned, keeping his eyes carefully averted from anything improper, and moved behind her. She felt his fingers on the laces, working with surprising gentleness for such large hands. The corset loosened, and she could breathe fully for the first time since entering the water. "There," he said, and immediately turned away again. "I will be outside checking on your horse if you found your way here on one. Take your time." The door closed behind him before she could respond. Alone, Naomi stripped off the wet layers with shaking hands and pulled on the clothes he had provided. The shirt hung to her knees, the trousers required rolling up multiple times, but they were blissfully dry. She wrapped herself in the blanket and called out that she was dressed. He entered carrying her saddle and bags, water streaming from them. "I found your horse grazing a quarter-mile back. She is in my lean-to now, brushed down and fed. The saddle will need to dry." "Thank you," Naomi said, and realized those were the first words of gratitude she had spoken. "Thank you for saving my life. I would have drowned if not for you." He set the saddle near the fire and straightened. "What is your name?" "Naomi Abbott. I was traveling from Salt Lake City to Evanston to meet my brother. Alone. Disapproval colored his tone. My traveling companion took ill in the last town. I thought I could manage the final leg myself. She lifted her chin despite the trembling. Clearly I was wrong, clearly. But his expression softened slightly. I am Pierce Dalton. Mr. Dalton, I owe you my life. Pierce, he corrected. We are past formalities, I think, given that you are wearing my clothes. A surprised laugh escaped her, though it came out shaky. I suppose we are. Then you must call me Naomi. He nodded and moved to the fire, adding more wood. When did you last eat? The question made her realize she was ravenous. This morning, before the rain started coming down harder. I will make something. He moved to the shelves and began gathering supplies with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything. Soon the smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the cabin. Naomi watched him work, this strange mountain man who had appeared from nowhere to save her. His movements were economical but not hurried, his large hands surprisingly deft as he prepared the meal. The muscles in his forearms flexed as he worked, visible beneath the rolled sleeves of his buckskin shirt. "How long have you lived here?" she asked. 5 years. I came west after the war ended. You fought for the Union. He did not elaborate, and something in his tone suggested the subject was closed. He brought her a plate of bacon, beans, and cornbread, along with a cup of coffee so hot it steamed. She accepted them gratefully, wrapping her still cold fingers around the cup's warmth. "Eat," he commanded gently. "You need to get your strength back." The food was simple but delicious, or perhaps everything tasted better when you had nearly died. Naomi ate slowly, feeling warmth return to her body in increments. Pierce ate his own meal standing, leaning against the wall near the fire, those gray eyes occasionally flicking toward her as if checking that she was still there, still breathing. "The rain shows no sign of stopping," he observed. "The creek will not be passable for days, perhaps longer. You will need to stay here until it is safe to travel." The impropriety of spending days alone with a strange man should have shocked her. A week ago it would have, but Naomi found she could not muster the appropriate horror. This man had risked his own life to save hers. Whatever else he might be, he was no threat to her virtue. "I do not wish to impose," she said carefully. "You have no choice. Even if you were well enough to travel, which you are not, the trails are impassable, you stay." It was not a question. Naomi bristled slightly at his commanding tone, but exhaustion was creeping through her limbs, making argument seem like too much effort. "Then I thank you for your hospitality." He grunted, which she was beginning to suspect was his version of "you are welcome." The fire crackled, warmth finally penetrating the cold that had settled into her bones. Her eyelids grew heavy. "You should rest," Pierce said, seeming to notice her struggle to stay awake. "Take the bed." "Where will you sleep?" "I have slept on harder surfaces than a floor." He moved to the bed and pulled off the top layers of furs, creating a pallet near the fire. "Rest, Naomi. You are safe here." She wanted to argue, but her body had reached its limit. Naomi made her way to the bed, which smelled of pine and something uniquely masculine. She crawled beneath the remaining furs and let her eyes close. Her last conscious thought was of strong arms carrying her from rushing water, and the steady beat of Pierce Dalton's heart against her ear. When Naomi woke, the cabin was dark except for the glow of the fire. Rain still drummed against the roof in a steady rhythm. She sat up slowly, disoriented, and saw Pierce sitting in the chair she had occupied earlier, whittling something by firelight. He looked up at her approach, his hands stilling. "How do you feel?" "Better. Warmer." She moved closer to the fire, wrapping one of the furs around her shoulders. "What time is it?" "Near midnight. You slept for 8 hours." "You have been awake this whole time." He shrugged his massive shoulders. I do not need much sleep. Naomi settled into the other chair, studying him in the flickering light. Why were you out in the storm? I was checking my trap lines. I heard your horse scream when it threw you. His jaw tightened. If I had been 10 minutes later, but you were not. She reached out impulsively and touched his arm, feeling the solid muscle beneath the buckskin. You saved me, Pierce. I do not know how to repay such a debt. His eyes met hers, and something sparked in their depths. There is no debt. Any decent man would have done the same. I do not think any man could have done what you did. The current was so strong, but you walked through it as if it were nothing. A faint smile touched his lips. I am stronger than most. It was a simple statement of fact without arrogance. Naomi found herself smiling back. I noticed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Pierce returned to his whittling, and she watched the wood take shape beneath his skilled hands. A bird, she realized. A hawk in flight. That is beautiful, she said softly. He glanced at the carving, then at her. I make them to trade in town. They bring fair prices from travelers passing through. You are an artist, he snorted. I am a trapper. This is just something to pass the time. But Naomi could see the care he took with each cut, the attention to detail in every feather. This was more than just passing time. This was creation, beauty brought forth from his strong hands. Tell me about Evanston, he said abruptly. What takes you there? My brother owns a general store. He wrote asking me to come help him run it. After our parents died last year, there was nothing keeping me in Salt Lake City. She pulled the fur closer around herself. I wanted a fresh start. You will have one. Once the rain stops and the creeks recede, I will take you there myself. You do not have to do that. Those gray eyes pinned her. I do. I will not risk you getting trapped again. The protectiveness in his voice sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with the fire. She found herself studying the planes of his face, the strong line of his jaw beneath the beard, the way firelight caught in his long dark hair. Why do you live out here alone? She asked, his hand stilled on the carving. For a long moment she thought he would not answer. Then, after the war, I could not stomach towns. Too many people, too much noise. Out here there is peace, quiet. A man can think. Do you never get lonely sometimes? He met her eyes. But loneliness is better than being surrounded by people and still feeling alone. Naomi understood that better than she wanted to admit. She had felt that way in Salt Lake City after her parents died, adrift among familiar faces that suddenly seemed like strangers. I know what you mean, she said softly. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that needed no words. Pierce set down his carving and stood, moving to the shelves. He returned with 2 cups of coffee, handing her one. Tell me about your parents, he said, and she did. Sitting by the fire in a mountain cabin while rain fell outside, Naomi told this stranger about her mother's laugh and her father's terrible jokes, about the influenza that had taken them both within days of each other. She told him about the emptiness that followed, the way familiar places became haunted by absence. Pierce listened without interrupting, his presence a solid, comforting weight in the chair beside her. When she finished, he told her about his own family. Parents who had died when he was young, a brother lost at Gettysburg, the way the war had taken pieces of his soul he was still trying to recover. Dawn was breaking by the time they finally fell silent. The rain had lessened to a drizzle gray light filtering through the cabin's small windows. You should rest more, Pierce said, though he made no move to rise from his chair. So should you, Naomi countered. He smiled, a real smile this time that transformed his weathered face. Perhaps we both should. But neither of them moved. They sat together as morning light grew stronger, drinking coffee and watching the fire burn low. and Naomi realized she had never felt quite so comfortable with another person in her entire life. The rain continued for 3 more days. Pierce insisted Naomi keep the bed while he slept on his pallet by the fire, though she protested each night. They fell into an easy routine. Pierce would go out each morning to check his traps and tend to the horses, returning wet and dripping to find Naomi had prepared coffee, and whatever breakfast could be managed from his supplies. "You do not have to do that," he said the second morning, but she could see the pleasure in his eyes at coming home to a warm meal. "You saved my life and gave me shelter. Cooking is the least I can do." She found herself looking forward to his returns, to the way water droplets caught in his long hair, the way he would shake himself like a great bear before entering the cabin. He always brought something with him: fresh meat for their meals, pine boughs to freshen the cabin's scent, once a handful of wildflowers that had somehow survived the rain. "I thought you might like them," he said gruffly, thrusting the bedraggled blooms toward her. Naomi accepted them with a smile that made his ears turn red beneath his beard. She put them in a cup of water on the table and caught him glancing at them throughout the day. They talked for hours, about everything and nothing. Pierce told her about the mountains, about tracking animals and reading weather in the clouds, about the harsh beauty of winter and the brief explosion of life that came with spring. Naomi told him about books she had read, about dreams she had harbored of seeing the ocean someday, about her hope that Evanston might become home. "You will like it there," Pierce said. "It is a good town, growing but not too large. The people are decent mostly." "Have you been there often?" "I go every few weeks to trade. I do not stay long." He paused. "Perhaps I will stay longer once you are settled there." The implication in his words made her heart skip. "I would like that." On the 4th day, Naomi woke to silence. The rain had stopped. She sat up in bed and saw Pierce already awake, standing at the window. "The storm has passed," he said without turning. "But the creek will still be too high to cross safely. Another day or two." She should have been relieved. Instead, she felt something like disappointment. Once the creek was passable, she would go to Evanston, and this strange, sweet interlude would end. Pierce turned from the window and caught her expression. "What is wrong?" "Nothing," she said quickly. "I am just eager to reach my brother, that is all." But his eyes saw too much. He crossed to the bed and crouched beside it, bringing himself to her level. "Are you frightened of what comes next?" "A little," she admitted. "Everything is so uncertain." His large hand covered hers where it rested on the furs. "You are strong, Naomi. You will build a good life in Evanston." "Will you be part of it?" The words escaped before she could stop them. Pierce's eyes widened slightly. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, a gesture so gentle it made her throat tighten. "Do you want me to be?" "Yes," she whispered. "These past days with you, I have never felt so myself, so seen. I do not want that to end." "Neither do I." His voice was rough with emotion. "From the moment I pulled you from that water, from the moment you wrapped your arms around me and held on, I felt something shift inside me. Like I had been waiting for you without knowing it." "Pierce," he released her hand and stood abruptly, running his fingers through his long hair. "I am a mountain man, Naomi. I live alone in a cabin miles from anywhere. I have little to offer a woman like you." She climbed out of bed, still wrapped in his oversized shirt, and crossed to him. "A woman like me, educated, refined. You deserve someone who can give you a proper home, a comfortable life." "I deserve someone who sees me," she said firmly. "Someone who saved my life and then listened to me talk for hours about my parents and my dreams. Someone who brings me wildflowers and carves beautiful things with his hands." She placed her palm against his chest, feeling his heart thunder beneath it. "You are not nothing, Pierce Dalton. You are everything. He looked down at her, something fierce and tender warring in his expression. "I am falling in love with you," he said roughly. "I know it is too soon, that I should not feel this way after only days, but I cannot help it." "Then do not help it." She rose on her toes, her free hand curling around the back of his neck. "Because I am falling in love with you too." Pierce's arms came around her, crushing her against his broad chest with a desperation that matched her own. He buried his face in her hair, his whole body shaking. "I thought I would be alone forever," he said against her temple. "I thought that was what I wanted, but then you held on to me and I realized what I had been missing." Naomi pulled back just enough to see his face. "I am still holding on," she said softly, "and I do not intend to let go." He kissed her then, tender and fierce all at once. His lips were soft despite the rough beard, his hands gentle despite their strength. Naomi melted into him, into this man who had saved her life and somehow, impossibly, stolen her heart. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Pierce rested his forehead against hers. "Come live with me," he said. "Here in this cabin. I know it is not much, but I can build on, make it bigger. We could have a good life here, Naomi. I would spend every day making sure you never regretted choosing me." "I could never regret choosing you," she said. "But Pierce, I promised my brother I would help with the store. He is counting on me." She watched disappointment cloud his features and hurried on. "But that does not mean I am saying no. Let me go to Evanston as planned. Let me speak with my brother and see what the situation truly is. Perhaps he does not need as much help as he thought. Perhaps we can find a compromise. And if we cannot, then we will figure something out, together." She cupped his bearded face in her hands. "I just found you, Pierce. I am not losing you over logistics." A slow smile spread across his face. "Together," he repeated. "I like the sound of that." They spent the rest of that day in a golden haze, stealing kisses and making plans. Pierce showed her around his property. The lean-to where the horses stood, the smokehouse and root cellar, the creek that was already beginning to recede. He pointed out where he was thinking of expanding the cabin, where a garden could go, where children might someday play. Children. Naomi teased, though her heart swelled at the thought. He flushed but did not back down. "Eventually, if you want them." "I do," she said softly. "I want everything with you." That night, Pierce gave Naomi the bed as usual, but this time he sat beside it, holding her hand until she fell asleep. She woke once in the darkness to find him still there, watching over her with an expression so tender it made her eyes sting with tears. "Go to sleep," she whispered. "I am not going anywhere." "I know," he said. "I just want to look at you a while longer." By the 6th day after her rescue, the creek had receded enough for safe passage. Pierce saddled both horses in the early morning, his movements slower than usual, as if he was reluctant to begin this journey that would take them to Evanston and an uncertain future. Naomi emerged from the cabin wearing her own clothes, now dry and cleaned as best she could manage. She had folded Pierce's shirt and trousers and left them on the bed, though part of her wanted to keep them, to hold on to this physical reminder of their time together. Pierce helped her mount her horse, his hands lingering on her waist. "Ready, as I will ever be." They rode in silence for the first hour, Pierce leading them along trails only he could see. The forest was lush and green from all the rain, wildflowers blooming in every clearing. It should have been beautiful, but Naomi could only think about what awaited them in Evanston. "What if my brother needs me?" she asked finally, voicing the fear that had kept her awake the night before. "What if I cannot leave the store?" Pierce twisted in his saddle to look back at her. "Then I will come to Evanston. You said you could not stomach towns." "I said I could not stomach being alone in towns." His gray eyes held hers. "I will not be alone if you are there." Hope bloomed in her chest. "You would do that, Leave your cabin, your mountains. I would do anything for you, Naomi. The location does not matter. You are my home now. She had to blink back tears. I love you. I love you too. He nudged his horse closer so he could reach across and squeeze her hand. Whatever we find in Evanston, we will face it together. They reached the town by late afternoon. Evanston was larger than Naomi had expected, a bustling settlement that had grown up around the railroad. The main street was lined with businesses, a hotel, a saloon, a dress shop, and there, near the center of town, Abbott General Store painted in neat letters above the door. A man emerged as they approached, tall and thin with Naomi's same auburn hair. Naomi! Thomas Abbott rushed forward to help her dismount, pulling her into a fierce hug. Thank God you are safe. When you did not arrive days ago, I feared the worst. I nearly met the worst, Naomi said, pulling back to gesture to Pierce. This is Pierce Dalton. He saved my life when I was trapped by rising creek water. Thomas turned to Pierce with gratitude shining in his eyes. Then, I owe you everything, Mr. Dalton. Pierce dismounted, and Naomi watched her brother's eyes widen slightly as he took in the mountain man's impressive size and rough appearance. But Thomas extended his hand without hesitation, and Pierce shook it. Your sister is brave, Pierce said simply. She survived a frightening ordeal with grace. I survived because of you, Naomi corrected. She turned to Thomas. May we speak privately? There is much I need to tell you. Thomas led them into the store, which was well stocked and organized, clearly thriving. A young woman stood behind the counter, pretty and blonde, who smiled shyly when Thomas introduced her as Catherine Miller, his assistant. In the back room, away from curious ears, Naomi told her brother everything. The storm, the rescue, the days in the cabin. She did not mention falling in love, but something in her expression must have given her away. You care for him, Thomas said. It was not a question. I love him, Naomi said simply. I know it seems sudden, but Thomas, when you know, and I know. Her brother was quiet for a long moment, then he smiled. I am happy for you, truly. Mr. Dalton seems like a good man, if a bit rough around the edges. The best man, Naomi agreed. But Thomas, I came here to help you with the store. I made a commitment. Actually, Thomas said, a slight flush creeping up his neck, I need to confess something. I do need help with the store, but perhaps not as much as I implied in my letters. The truth is, after Mother and Father died, you seemed so lost. I thought giving you a purpose, a reason to leave Salt Lake City, might help you heal. Naomi stared at him. You brought me here out of pity, not pity. Love, I wanted to give you a fresh start, a new beginning. I wanted my sister back. He glanced toward the door, beyond which Catherine was surely still working. And if I am being completely honest, I was hoping you might help me build up the courage to court Catherine properly. Having my sister here seemed like it would provide the respectability and support I needed. Despite everything, Naomi laughed. You manipulative schemer, guilty, Thomas grinned. But it worked, did it not? You are here, you are safe, and unless I am very much mistaken, you have found your own fresh start with Mr. Dalton. Pierce, Naomi corrected. And yes, I have. But I still want to help you, Thomas, both with the store and with courting Catherine, who clearly adores you, by the way. You think so? Thomas looked absurdly hopeful. I know so. Naomi squeezed his hand. So here is what I propose. I will stay in Evanston for a few weeks, help you get organized and build up your courage. In exchange, you give me your blessing to marry Pierce and make my home with him. In the mountains, wherever he wants to be. He said he would come to town for me, but Thomas, you should see him in the wilderness. He belongs there, and I think I might belong there too with him. Thomas pulled her into another hug. You have my blessing. You have always had my blessing. I just want you to be happy. "I am," Naomi whispered. "For the first time since Mother and Father died, I am truly happy." When they emerged from the back room, Pierce was standing stiffly near the door, clearly uncomfortable in the enclosed space. His eyes found Naomi immediately, searching her face. She crossed to him and took his hand, not caring who saw. "Thomas has given us his blessing. I will stay in town for a few weeks to help him, and then I am yours, if you will have me." The smile that broke across Pierce's face was like sunrise after a storm. "I will have you for the rest of my life if you will let me." "That can be arranged," she said, rising on her toes to kiss him softly behind them. Thomas cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should discuss the wedding." The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. Naomi stayed in the room above the general store that Thomas had prepared for her, but she spent every possible moment with Pierce. He came to town each day, slowly growing more comfortable with the bustle of civilization, and they would walk together through the streets or sit on the porch of the store, talking and planning their future. "I want to expand the cabin before you move in permanently," Pierce said one evening as they watched the sun set over the mountains. "Add another room, maybe two, build a proper kitchen." "I do not need fancy things, Pierce. I know, but I want to give them to you anyway." He played with her fingers, his touch gentle. "I want to give you everything." Naomi helped Thomas with the store's inventory and bookkeeping, and also helped him finally work up the courage to court Catherine properly. The younger woman had been waiting for Thomas to make his intentions clear, and once he did, she accepted immediately. They made plans for their own wedding to take place in the fall. "We will be married siblings," Thomas said happily. "Our children will be cousins." The thought of children made Naomi flush and smile. She and Pierce had not discussed the specifics, but she wanted his babies, wanted to see his strength and gentleness reflected in small faces. 3 weeks after arriving in Evanston, on a bright June morning, Naomi Abbott married Pierce Dalton in the small church on the edge of town. She wore a simple dress of cream muslin that Catherine had helped her alter, and carried wildflowers that Pierce had picked himself from the mountain meadows. Thomas walked her down the aisle, and Catherine stood as her witness. The ceremony was small and sweet, with only a handful of townsfolk in attendance, but when Pierce said his vows, his deep voice steady and sure, Naomi felt as though the whole world had condensed to just the two of them. "I promise to love you, protect you, and cherish you for all my days," Pierce said, his gray eyes locked on hers. "You held on to me when the waters rose, and I will hold on to you for the rest of our lives." "I promise to stand beside you, to build a life with you, and to never let go," Naomi responded, her voice thick with emotion. "You are my home, Pierce Dalton. Wherever you are, that is where I belong." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Pierce cupped her face in his large hands and kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. The small gathering applauded, and Naomi laughed against her husband's lips, joy bubbling up inside her. They spent their wedding night in a room at the hotel, but the next morning Pierce loaded their supplies onto a pack horse and they set out for the cabin. Their cabin now. Their home. The ride through the mountains was beautiful, summer in full bloom. Pierce pointed out landmarks and told her stories about the land, and Naomi drank it all in, memorizing every detail. This was her world now, and she wanted to know it as well as he did. When the cabin came into view, Naomi gasped. In the weeks they had been in Evanston, Pierce had been making trips back to work on expansions. The structure was noticeably larger, with a new addition that nearly doubled the living space. "When did you do all this?" she asked in wonder. "I had a lot of motivation," Pierce said, helping her dismount. "Come see." He had built a separate bedroom larger than before with a real window that looked out over the valley. The main room now had space for a proper dining table, and a cooking area with a new stove he must have hauled up from town. There were shelves for books, hooks for hanging clothes, and small touches that showed he had been thinking of her. A rocking chair positioned to catch the afternoon light, a mirror hung at the right height for her to use. "Pierce," she breathed. "It is perfect. You are perfect." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. "Welcome home, wife." That night in their marriage bed, Pierce made love to her with exquisite gentleness, his strong hands reverent on her skin. He whispered words of love and devotion, and Naomi learned the geography of his body. The scars from his trapping work, the old wound from the war, the solid strength of him. Afterwards, wrapped in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Naomi thought about the moment he had pulled her from the rising water. She had been drowning, lost and afraid, and he had been her salvation. "What are you thinking?" Pierce murmured, his fingers trailing up and down her spine. "That I am glad I held on to you," she said softly. "I will never give you a reason to let go," he promised. The summer passed in golden contentment. Naomi learned the rhythms of mountain life, checking the trap lines, preserving food for winter, tracking game. Pierce was an excellent teacher, patient and thorough, and she proved an eager student. She learned to shoot, to skin a rabbit, to read the weather in the clouds. But they also made the cabin into a true home. Naomi planted a garden that flourished in the mountain soil. She sewed curtains for the windows and made the bed with quilts she pieced together during long evenings while Pierce carved his wooden birds. They talked for hours, learning each other's minds as thoroughly as they had learned each other's bodies. Once a month they rode into Evanston for supplies and to visit Thomas and Catherine. Naomi could see Pierce growing more comfortable with these trips, no longer flinching at the noise and crowds. He even agreed to join Thomas for a drink at the saloon while she and Catherine visited. "He is a good man," Catherine said one afternoon as they took tea in the apartment above the store. "Thomas says all the men in town respect him." "He is the best man," Naomi agreed, watching through the window as Pierce and Thomas walked down the street together, deep in conversation. By autumn, Naomi knew she was pregnant. She recognized the signs, the morning nausea, the exhaustion, the way her body felt different. She told Pierce on a crisp October evening as they sat by the fire. "A baby." He looked stunned, then elated. "We are going to have a baby in the spring, I think." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. He pulled her into his lap, holding her as though she were made of glass. "A child, our child. Naomi, I never dreamed I could have this. A wife I love, a baby on the way. It is more than I deserve." "You deserve everything," she said firmly. "And I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you know it." Winter in the mountains was harsh but beautiful. Snow fell heavy and deep, transforming the landscape into a pristine wonderland. Pierce had prepared well, and they had plenty of supplies to see them through. Naomi spent the short days cooking and sewing baby clothes, while Pierce kept them supplied with fresh meat and firewood. On the coldest nights, they would lie together in their bed, Pierce's large hands splayed across her growing belly, feeling their baby move and kick. "Strong," he would murmur with pride. "Like their mother." "Stubborn, like their father," Naomi would counter, and they would laugh together in the darkness. Thomas and Catherine married in November, a beautiful ceremony despite the cold. Naomi stood as witness for Catherine, her pregnancy just beginning to show beneath her dress. When Catherine caught the bride, she laughed and handed it directly to Naomi. "Too late for me," she said with a grin, "but may it bring you continued happiness." By the time spring came again, Naomi was large and ungainly, but Pierce treated her as though she were precious porcelain. He would not let her do any heavy work, insisting she rest and preserve her strength for the birth. "You are being ridiculous," she told him one afternoon when he stopped her from carrying water from the creek. "I am being careful," he corrected, taking the bucket from her hands. "You are carrying the most precious thing in the world." Their son was born on a warm May morning, almost exactly a year after Pierce had pulled Naomi from the rising creek. The labor was long and difficult, but Pierce never left her side, holding her hand and whispering encouragement even when she screamed. When the baby finally emerged, wailing and red-faced, Pierce cut the cord with shaking hands and placed the infant on Naomi's chest. She looked down at the tiny face, seeing Pierce's strong features already evident, and felt her heart expand in a way she had not thought possible. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you. What should we name him?" Pierce asked, his finger gently stroking the baby's soft cheek. They had discussed names for months without settling on one. But looking at her son now, Naomi knew. "Matthew, it means gift of God." "Matthew Dalton." Pierce tested the name, then smiled. "It is perfect. He is perfect." "He looks like you," Naomi said, noting the dark hair and strong chin. "He has your eyes." Pierce leaned down to kiss first the baby, then his wife. "Thank you, Naomi. Thank you for him, for this life, for everything." Matthew proved to be a healthy, happy baby who grew like a weed. By the time Thomas and Catherine came to visit in July, he had already outgrown his first set of clothes. "He is enormous," Thomas said, holding his nephew carefully. "How much are you feeding him?" "Constantly," Naomi said with a laugh. "He has his father's appetite." Catherine announced her own pregnancy that visit, due in the winter. The two women spent hours talking about babies and motherhood while Pierce and Thomas worked on building a crib for Matthew. "I am glad you stayed in Evanston that first time," Catherine said softly. "If you had not been there to encourage Thomas, we might never have married." "I am glad too," Naomi said, watching Pierce through the window as he worked, Matthew strapped to his broad chest in a sling she had made. Everything worked out exactly as it should. The years passed in a blur of happiness. Matthew grew into a sturdy toddler, then a rambunctious boy who followed his father everywhere. Naomi gave birth to a daughter 2 years later, whom they named Margaret after Pierce's mother. She had Naomi's auburn hair and Pierce's gray eyes, a perfect blend of them both. Thomas and Catherine had 3 children in quick succession, twin girls and then a boy. The cousins grew up visiting each other regularly, spending summers on the mountain and winters in town. Pierce proved to be an excellent father, patient and loving but firm when needed. He taught Matthew to trap and hunt, to respect the land and the animals they shared it with. He was gentler with Margaret, but no less devoted, carving her dolls and letting her braid flowers into his long hair. "You have gone soft," Naomi teased one afternoon, finding him having a tea party with their 5-year-old daughter, his large frame folded onto a child-sized chair. "Completely," he agreed, not looking at all bothered by the fact. "And I blame you entirely." When Matthew was 7 and Margaret 5, Naomi gave birth to another son whom they named Thomas after her brother. He was a quiet baby, thoughtful and observant, content to watch the world with solemn eyes. "3 children," Pierce said one night, all of them finally asleep. "We have 3 perfect children. Are you happy?" Naomi asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happier than I ever thought possible." He pulled her close, and she settled against his chest the way she had that first night in the cabin. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life, that you are my wife, that we have this family. Believe it," she said softly, "because I am never letting go, remember? Never, he agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. I am counting on it. The years continued to pass, each one building on the last. Matthew grew tall and strong like his father, taking naturally to mountain life. Margaret proved to have her mother's love of books and learning, and Pierce made sure she had access to all the education Evanston could provide. Thomas the younger was a perfect blend of both parents, thoughtful but strong, gentle but brave. Pierce expanded the cabin again as the family grew, adding more rooms until it was a true house, comfortable and sturdy. Naomi's garden flourished, providing vegetables through the summer and preserves for winter. They acquired chickens and a milk cow, building up a homestead that was nearly self-sufficient. Thomas and Catherine's general store continued to thrive, and they became pillars of the Evanston community. Pierce was no longer the strange mountain man who occasionally came to town, but a respected member of the community, known for his integrity and his skill. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Pierce took Naomi back to the creek where he had pulled her from the rising water. It was a beautiful June day, the water running clear and peaceful. "Do you remember?" he asked, standing on the bank. "Every moment," Naomi said. "I remember being so frightened and then looking up and seeing you. I thought you were an angel." "Hardly that." He pulled her into his arms. "But you were right to hold on to me. I have spent every day since trying to be worthy of that trust. You have been more than worthy." She reached up to cup his bearded face, now touched with silver at the temples. "You have given me everything, Pierce. A home, a family, a love I never dreamed existed. You gave me the same," he said softly. "You gave me a reason to live again, to hope again. You saved me just as surely as I saved you that day." They stood together on the creek bank, the water flowing peacefully past, and Naomi thought about the terrified woman she had been that day and the confident, happy woman she was now. All because a mountain man had heard her horse scream and come running. All because he had been strong enough to carry her through the current, and she had been brave enough to hold on. When their children were grown, Matthew chose to stay on the mountain, building his own cabin nearby with the woman he married. Margaret became a teacher in Evanston, marrying the doctor who had moved to town the year she turned 18. Young Thomas split his time between both worlds, helping his uncle run the store in winter and working the trap lines with his father in summer. Pierce and Naomi grew old together in the cabin they had built, their love deepening with each passing year. On cold winter nights, they would still sit by the fire, Pierce whittling his wooden birds and Naomi reading aloud from whatever book she had acquired on their last trip to town. "Read that part again," Pierce would say sometimes, not because he had not heard it, but because he loved the sound of her voice. And she would, smiling at this man who still made her heart skip after all these years. On a spring morning in their 35th year of marriage, Naomi woke to find Pierce already up, standing at the window looking out over the valley. She joined him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Everything," he said softly. "The life we have built. Our children and grandchildren. How lucky I am." "We both are," she said. He turned to her, and she saw tears in his gray eyes. "I have loved you from the moment you wrapped your arms around me and refused to let go, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I will love you just as long," she promised. They had many more years together, watching their grandchildren grow, seeing Evanston transform from a rough frontier town into a proper city. Pierce eventually sold his trap lines to Matthew, content to spend his days working in the garden and carving toys for the ever-increasing number of grandchildren. Naomi remained vibrant and sharp, the heart of their large, loving family. Every Sunday, the family would gather at the mountain house for dinner, filling the rooms with laughter and love. Pierce would sit at the head of the table, Naomi at his side, and watch their legacy unfold before them. When Pierce finally passed in his sleep at the age of 78, Naomi held his hand just as she had held him that day in the creek. She whispered words of love and gratitude, thanked him for every moment they had shared. "I am still holding on," she told him through her tears. "And I will hold on until we meet again." She lived another 5 years, surrounded by the family they had created, passing peacefully in the cabin they had built together. Her children buried her beside Pierce on a hill overlooking the valley, where wildflowers bloomed every spring. The mountain house remained in the Dalton family for generations. Matthew's children and their children after them added to it, expanded it, but kept the original cabin at its heart. They told stories about the strong mountain man who had saved a woman from rising creek water, and the brave woman who had held on and never let go. Because some loves are written in water and stone, strong enough to survive any storm. Some loves start with a rescue and grow into a legacy. And some loves, the very best loves, begin the moment two people hold on to each other and decide never to let go, no matter what the world throws at them. Pierce and Naomi Dalton had that kind of love. And the creek still runs clear and strong through the valley, a reminder of where their story began, where two souls found each other in the midst of a storm and built a love that would last forever.